Hello, everybody. Welcome back again. I would like to apologize, as I know Sam would, about all these technical difficulties. Trying a new setup, probably not one we're going to stick with all the problems. But you know what? You live, you learn, and that's fearless learning for you. And that's why you gotta see what's going on, diagnose the problem, and move on. So.
Exactly. Fearless learning at its finest. Because it's a holiday, we are actually coming at you live. The beauty of technology is you can do live from anywhere. So we are coming at you from home right now. But home also has its different challenges, I guess, with live videos. So typically it'll be done from our location. So hopefully we will solve some of these technical difficulties, but thank you all for sticking with us this afternoon. So this is part 2 now of Conversations with Code, and there will be a part 3 that comes up next, where we mention watching part 1. So watch part 1, and then part 2, and then part 3. And we'll see if maybe there's a way we can edit it together so it makes it a little bit clearer for you guys. But we were talking about game development and a young gentleman who had kind of realized that coding wasn't necessarily his thing, but now he had an understanding of how code works and how to kind of take that knowledge and then figure out what it was he actually wanted to do for his kind of future career with that. So he had ultimately decided that he wanted to be more involved in like maybe the art department or the marketing department. So he's still involved in the games industry, just not the one who's actually physically writing the code. Which is also a very important skill of why everyone should at least start to learn or start to explore the idea of coding, so that you can get a better understanding of, now that we have these new jobs that are kind of coming up, how exactly do I want to be involved in those? Am I the person who is physically writing the code, or am I maybe doing something that relates to that coding or technology in a different sort of way?
Just to preface, though, it is important to, at least if you do plan on entering the video game industry, or you have somebody in your life that that wants to, it is very important to at least have somewhat of an understanding, because any feedback's good feedback, right? You don't have to be an expert to make that one suggestion that makes everything work. So it's very important, if you're a tester, if you're a designer, it might be great that you're like, oh, I have this great idea and it's going to be awesome and everyone's going to love it. And then the programmers are sitting there sweating because they're like, how are we going to do this? This is going to be so hard. So it's important to know. But yeah, obviously very versatile industry and lots of things you can explore within it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we use a couple of tools in our programs. One is Game Maker Studio, and Game Maker Studio has actually produced, I guess technically Game Maker and Yo-Yo Games itself hasn't produced it, but the tool itself was used to create some very successful games that have come out over the recent years. And what we like about Game Maker is it allows you to kind of get the experience of what goes into designing a game all in one. So it lets you create your own sort of sprites and actually create the assets. It lets you do the programming and the code behind to add that functionality to your game.
Lets you do testing.
Yeah, lets you do testing. So a lot of excellent opportunities there. And what's great about Game Maker is it has 2 different ways that you can actually write the coding or write the language behind it. One is with drag and drop, so kind of block-based coding sort of idea. That will allow kids to have a better fundamental understanding of what the functions behind the game actually are. So, you can drag your direction block, your speed block, things like that. So it allows them to better explore what goes into a game behind the scenes, or how things work and how things move behind the scenes. But then it also has a Game Maker language, which allows you to type in lines of code. So you're actually starting to write lines of code for that game there. So it's a great tool, and we like it because they can start with drag and drop, or like more block-based kind of coding language, until they feel like they have that solid foundation of what's going on behind the scenes. And then from there, take that project and take those skills and again apply them in a very similar but different way.
Yeah. And a lot of people have different views on block-based coding. Some people love it. Some people don't think it's that great. But it's good, at least in Game Maker, because a lot of times you want something to happen, right? As we said with Arduino, you want that gratification. You want to see that your troubles have actually gotten you something. But it's really important to know that, like, what is going on, as Sam said, before you really know all the fine details, right? To hark back to the point on code being like, or computer science and coding being like linguistics, is, you can communicate. Like, I can write a sentence and I can say, it is very sunny. I like the sun because it makes the day warm. Maybe my punctuation isn't perfect. I'm missing commas somewhere. I have too many. And a lot of that syntactic stuff is actually a big challenge beginners have when they're getting into code. So it's really important to get things like, or it's really handy rather, to get things like the block base, because you get the idea, you get what's happening, and then GameMaker actually has a handy feature that lets you convert that to their language. Mm-hmm. So then you can see, okay, this is how it's actually done in the language. Some people, if you have experienced GameMaker before or you plan to explore it, you might be like, oh, well, block-based does, everything I need it to. And it can do a lot, but obviously there's more flexibility if you actually have code, right? Because if somebody just gave you a bucket of words and you had to piece together a sentence, it's a lot harder to express yourself than if you just had a pencil and you could write down what you wanted to.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was actually a really good point that you brought up too about block-based coding, because there is a lot of discussion about, like, is it good, is it not good? It's one of those things that block-based coding doesn't necessarily allow us to look at coding as it actually is, but it's great for a starting point. And so if your kids are interested in starting coding, block-based coding can actually be a really good place for them to start to again, understand the functions behind what those blocks are doing, but always good to have a conversation with them to just kind of help them understand that block-based coding is coding, but it's not necessarily the way that code looks in a more professionally applied sense, if that makes sense. But another tool that we like to use for game design and that we're starting to explore a little bit more is Unity. And Unity is basically an industry standard tool. So again, allowing kids to look at different technologies and how these things are applied in a real world context is very important to us, so that they do have a very solid understanding and a realistic understanding of what these things are going to look like for their futures. The cool thing about Unity too, that I know some of our co-op students are exploring right now, is you can do AR and VR capabilities with it. So yeah, that's an exciting kind of way that they can look at translating code in different contexts as well, especially new contexts that we don't even necessarily know too much about yet.
Sorry, if I just may, in case anyone is interested in exploring Unity, and GameMaker for that matter, but Unity, it's a free download. It's big, but it's free, so that's good. If you do plan on programming, because there is programming, or rather scripting, but we're not going to really get into what the differences are. But there is a different, but for our purposes, it's all just coding. The language used is C#. GameMaker language is a derivative of C#. GameMaker there's a trial version. Mm-hmm. It's unlimited use, but basically they limit the number of sprites and objects and stuff you can use. Otherwise, if you are really invested, you can purchase it, but it's pretty hefty, so.
Yeah, so lots of options at the very least.
Yeah.
And then, we also have our coding club. So kind of going back to how different ways that we do applied coding at STEM Minds, is we have our coding club, which Mac runs every Saturday with another one of our STEM coaches, Eric. And it takes kids through 3 different modules, one being Java, one being C++, and one being Python for the time being, although we are looking at new modules to add in, that allows them to look at code and writing line-based code in variety of different contexts and through different projects, and take those basic coding skills or those skills and see how they apply to different languages or different kind of dialogue dialects. We've kind of referred them to as like dialects as well. So very similar to like, for example, if I go back to Italian, learning Italian dialect has some similarities with Spanish dialect, which might have some similarities to French dialect and things like that. So again, looking at what those foundational concepts are and how they apply to different languages.
Yeah, and you might be wondering, why do we have different languages? Why do we need different languages? The short answer is that they do very different things. Java is very good. It's strongly typed, if anybody cares. Basically, it just means that it wants to know exactly what's going on. So it's very secure, very good for things like banking applications. C++ typically is faster. C++ is pretty much the industry standard for game design because it can operate on restricted hardware like a console environment a lot better than some of the other ones can. And Python really heavily focused on in the scientific community because it's very readable, it's very understandable, and it's sort of easy to pick up and kind of get into.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, yeah, again, like just looking at how, you know, those fundamental concepts that they learn, depending on what you are writing code for, how you're actually using it, how those kind of look in different sort of contents or different sort of aspects. And then we recently, this past week, got some air block drones that we are looking at doing code and incorporating some coding programs in the very near future of drone coding. So basically taking a look at, again, these new technologies that are becoming more prevalent in our society and looking at how we can start to understand how code is used with them and how, yeah, basically just how technology is used in our everyday life. So I won't say too much about that yet, but stay tuned for more updates on our drone coding class because it's very exciting. But again, to kind of bring it back, the goal is for kids to progress from learning these foundational skills in that kind of project-based learning environment to more independent projects. So the idea is that no matter what class they're doing, so for example, if it's something like the coding club, they're starting in, you know, Java and learning how to program in Java, and then they're, you know, learning in C++, and then they're learning in Python. And then if they're enjoying it and want to continue, they can come back to the Java class, but instead of redoing things that they've already done, they're taking that really solid foundational knowledge that they now have and applying it to independent projects of their choosing, so that if there's something that they're really interested in, they're like, oh, I really want to try this, they can try it in an environment that is safe and supportive. Yeah. So that we become more of, not so much as like the teachers or instructors, but the facilitators to their own kind of independent learning journey. And by looking at coding in these different contexts, kids really are building those transferable skills that are going to help them be more prepared for whatever kind of future of work they go into. So typically when we talk about coding, and, you know, again, there's a lot of talk around code and like, why is it important? A lot of people ask, like, why should I learn how to code? Or like, why exactly are we having these conversations? The fact of the matter is that our world is changing and technology is all around us. Like Max said earlier, it's definitely not going to go in different ways in the future. By learning how to better communicate with our technology and really having an understanding of how it works, we're moving away from that idea of being a digital consumer to a digital creator. So instead of that person who's kind of walking down the sidewalk glued to their phone like this and not watching where they're going, we're really starting to interact with the technology in a more effective and more meaningful way. Yeah. So we're really starting to understand how it works instead of just kind of, I guess for lack of a better term, mindlessly using it on an everyday basis. And
it's empowering, right?
Yes.
I mean, even if you want to do a very simple, like, you know, say you want to counter, right? And you're like, oh, I'm going to count the sit-ups. You could wait for somebody to try and make what you want, or if you know how and you understand, you can try and do it yourself, right? Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's just having this skill set is really useful for being able to tackle these problems in a way that maybe you weren't considering before or weren't necessarily exposed to before.
Yeah, and especially in the case of our future generation and our younger generation, it's especially important for them to learn these skills because they need to better prepare for the jobs that are going to be the ones that they go into by the time that they're ready to enter the workforce. So we talk a little bit about this in part 3, but really, like, we don't even know what those jobs are going to be yet. So if we start on building those foundational skills now, then by the time they're ready to enter the workforce, and really by the time that, you know, we get to that point where even adults like Mac and myself, we're still able to kind of keep up and still understand the way the world around us so that we can help add value to society as a whole. So basically, we wanted to talk about the importance of what we find to be almost more of the benefits of coding is not necessarily the technical skills, but the soft skills that come with it. So those kind of solid foundational skills that are transferable across any sort of industry, that come just inherently with learning how to code. So a recent study by the Partnership for 21st Century Learning states that the skills that contribute to greater employment are actually those that are transferable. And in this article, they interview Google, or they're talking to people at Google. And the people that they're talking to at Google are saying what they're looking for in their employees right now, and the people that they're hiring aren't actually those technical skills. So they're not necessarily looking for, they still want people who know how to write the code and program and things like that. But they're actually looking more so or highlighting the skills that would typically come from like a liberal arts degree or like a social studies degree or something like that. And those typically being what we refer to as the 4 C's. So collaboration, communication, critical thinking, and creativity. And the reason for that being is that these skills are totally transferable, and they allow you to just like look at problems and look at projects in a different light. So in part 3 of our video, which should be below us on the timeline when this one is posted, talks a little bit more in depth about those skills and why those are actually what are most fundamental about learning how to code rather than the actual technical skill itself, which is still important, just in a different sort of way. So be sure to watch part 3 next so you can kind of hear what we have to say about that.
All right, thanks everybody.